Afternoon to the November 14 Monday Board of County Commissioners work session with Colorado Springs Utilities. And we have 4 commissioners present on the dais, and we have Commissioner Williams with us online. And I do see her there. And just to check on the communications, can you hear us, Commissioner?
Yes, I can.
Okay, very good. So we have all 5 commissioners present. It looks like today we will have the Honorable Wayne Williams, Colorado Springs Utilities Board Chair, and the Colorado Springs City Council member as well with us today, along with Lisa Barbado, Chief Systems Planning and Project Officer for Colorado Springs Utilities, and a few other staff. I'm sure you'll take the opportunity to introduce yourself. And that is item number 1, staff introduction. Why don't you come on up and let's get started.
Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Wayne Williams, Chair of Colorado Springs Utilities. And because they know all the specific titles, I'll let Lisa make the formal introductions of the other folks that are with us today. And we've got one who saw CH and went to City Hall, as opposed to Centennial Hall. It's like it stands for multiple things. So wanted to talk a little bit first. Mr. Chair, thank you. You and I have been talking about getting this scheduled, and obviously given the busy schedules and elections, took us a couple months to do that. But I think it is important that we share some information as your largest utility provider in El Paso County. And if I can get the first slide, please. Or do I push? There we go. So you see here a general area of the city of Colorado Springs, but you'll notice there's some odd colors in it. And you've got, I think, a more detailed map that's been provided to you. We also, I think, have given you a hard copy that's a little larger version. But let me walk through a couple things here that I think are important to know. Colorado Springs Utilities is a 4-service utility. We provide gas, electric, water, and wastewater services throughout the city of Colorado Springs. But that's not it. We also provide significant services in the unincorporated county. And in fact, we are the largest water provider in the parts of El Paso County that are not Colorado Springs, which is something that sometimes people, when they hear our name, Colorado Springs Utilities, are not aware of. So we are the water provider for the Air Force Academy and Fort Carson, being 2 of the largest primary employers in our community, and both of which are within, except for the new visitor center, unincorporated El Paso County. I remember being a little annoyed that when President Bush came here to Fort Carson and he greeted the mayor and ignored the county commissioners, even though he was actually in unincorporated El Paso County at Fort Carson. But he was in the area served by our water services in Colorado Springs Utilities. We also work with a number of other communities. So we are the water provider for Manitou Springs, for Cascade, for Green Mountain Falls. And in some cases, we provide the water and they sell it to their customers directly, and we serve as the entity that provides it. We also convey, treat, and deliver water for security, for Denala and Glen Eagle. And so we have a significant amount of emphasis in the areas you sometimes might think of as being not Colorado Springs, but are actually areas served by Colorado Springs Utilities. As shown on the map, we also provide wastewater services outside the city, including Strathmore Hills, Garden Valley, and Manitou. And then if you look at some of the odd maps here, and Lisa may take you into some more detail here, but you'll see some other lines. So we actually provide gas. You see this beautiful yellow line. So gas in the Falcon area is provided by Colorado Springs Utilities. The electric boundary goes out as well up the pass. And so we are the electric provider up the pass on Highway 24. And so some of these might be counterintuitive when you hear the name Colorado Springs Utilities. And it's one of the reasons why I thought it was important that you as commissioners have an understanding of what we do and how we operate. One of the other important lines to be aware of is this beautiful line that's very heavy here. And this is the boundary between the Platte River Basin and the Arkansas River Basin. And Colorado Springs Utilities operates within the Arkansas River Basin. Our water comes from, in part, the Platte. About 5% of our water comes out of the Platte system. Most of our water actually comes out of the Colorado River system. And some of you have been on our water tour and seen some of those transbasin diversions and the significant engineering feats that they actually are. And then we also work cooperatively with a number of entities with respect to wastewater treatment as well. And Lisa will cover some of that. But I appreciate you taking the time today to become more aware of what we actually do. And as you think about water providers, recognize that we are the largest and it's not close when you add in the number of people at Fort Carson and the Air Force Academy and the other places that we work with. We do work cooperatively with a number of the other water providers here. I should note, we'll talk a little bit about a water ordinance that Lisa's going to present on towards the end. But as you're probably aware from the paper, we will be selecting a new utilities executive director. Ram Benjamin has announced his departure at the end of the month. And so we will be working in a process to try to make sure we choose someone who will continue that visionary leadership that has helped us address a number of matters. And we're going to talk about some of those today. So unless there's any questions for me, I'm going to turn it over to the experts and let them talk about some of what we actually do here at Colorado Springs Utilities.
Great. I'll just ask if any of the commissioners have questions at this point.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
I'll just, I do have one, but
Yes.
it'll probably maybe be brought up at some point during the presentation, but I am interested in kind of the potential interplay of CSU and the city's annexation agreement with the county, because we have an agreement basically for early notification going in both directions. And I think it's been noted that there wasn't really a treatment about how CSU may do something similar, whether that be kind of an annexation of an area or adding service to an area as a result of the annexation. So I'd be interested in making sure we have a conversation about that sometime today.
Sure. And Lisa's actually going to cover some of that in the presentation, and then we can pick that up after she gives the background on it. So that we've got that, but happy to participate in that discussion with you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, let me introduce Lisa Barbato.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Barbato. I am the Chief System Planning and Projects Officer at Colorado Springs Utilities. And first of all, I'd just like to say it's a privilege to be here today. The partnership with the county and the city is very important to us, and I just really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the work that we're doing on the water and the energy side of our business. I would like to introduce two other Colorado Springs Utilities employees. We've got Brittany Schneider here, as well as Ryan Macker, and they're from our governmental affairs. So thank you for being here. So Wayne did a very good job covering this, this map. And again, you have that in front of you. Just a couple other things that I thought I would hit on is that we do have some electric franchise agreements with Manitou and Green Mountain Falls. And so again, that is shown by the red line outside the city limits. We also do have some major water system partnerships, and you're probably familiar of these. We've got our Southern Delivery System, which delivers water from Pueblo Reservoir up north to our city, and we partner with Fountain Security as well as Pueblo West as our partner in that. We own that, a portion of that, as well as we operate that for those entities. We also are partners in the Fountain Valley Authority, and that is a system that was built by the Bureau of Reclamation, and CSU owns and operates that, and we're part ownership as well with Fountain Security, Stratmer, and Widefield Water and Sanitation Districts. So we definitely have a presence in the region and feel like we have a very strong partnership with other entities, municipalities in this area. Were there any other questions on this map before we go to the next slide? Okay, we could progress.
Yeah, I think we just checking, Commissioner Williams, any questions so far?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Let's proceed.
Okay. I guess I get a Okay, so I'm going to dive in a little bit around water and discuss a little bit about some of the water planning that we've got going on. We have a sustainable water plan, and this plan was completed in 2017. We had a very extensive public process that we completed, as well as we worked with our utility board on approval of this plan. We do update our sustainable water plan every year. We call it our true up. And so what we do is we actually update that based on a change in assumptions. And some of those assumptions could be growth rates. It could be changes in available water supplies, such as the Colorado River. Any of those type of assumptions we update in our plan. And some of the bullets on the slide really hit on some of the key areas that our plan focuses on over the next 50 years. And so a big portion of our plan is adding additional water supplies. And we have plans to increase our storage from 90,000 to 120,000 acre feet. And so some of those projects include our Montgomery Reservoir, where we're increasing the capacity by 4,000 acre feet. And so this is a reservoir that is near Hoosier Pass, and we are going to be actually raising that dam and increasing the storage level of that. We also are working with Pueblo Board of Waterworks on the Clear Creek Reservoir. They actually own a reservoir up by Buena Vista, and they have some capacity in that, and they're going to expand that, and we're going to partner with them in the feasibility study to expand that. And so that expansion will increase that from about 11,000 to 30,000 acre feet. So definitely some significant storage projects. Storage is very important to our system. It provides resiliency based on runoff for seasons, and it allows us to really have that flexibility with meeting our customer demands. Another area that's very important in our plan is reuse. We have a very extensive non-potable water system where we take water and irrigate the major golf courses in town, many of the parks in town. And so we do have plans to expand that system by several thousand acre feet for irrigation, but our biggest plan is really to reuse the water for direct potable reuse. And the last couple years, we have completed a pilot. We worked with the School of Mines and the state and on a pilot really trying to educate our community about the future reuse of our water supplies and how important that water is. The third...
With regard to reuse, I've got a quick question on that. So I'm sure you're well aware of the proposed loop project, which I think comes from a consortium of different municipalities and Cherokee and others. And they'd been talking about possibly getting up to 80% reuse, which is a pretty massive number. And I don't know in your plan if you have some goals about water reuse, getting it back to potable for potable reuse within CSU. I don't know if you've got any goals like that, or trying to get to 10% or 20% or moving to some bigger numbers, or what's the thinking that you might have at this point?
So our resource plan identifies a goal of 50 to 75 million gallons per day. And so that is, I'd have to calculate what that is.
It could just be rough speaking,
Yeah,
you know.
So we've got about 250 MGD. It's probably
30 to 50%?
50%. I would say 50%.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Another key portion of our sustainable water plan is our agricultural transfers. And so we have plans to acquire water in the lower Arkansas Basin of 15 to 25,000 acre feet. We just signed an IGA with Bent County within the last couple months to actually acquire 15,000 acre feet from that county. And so we are really pleased with that program. We're working very closely with the agricultural community. It's a very mutual beneficial program where they are still able to use the water for agriculture, so we're not impacting what they do, but yet there's a portion of that water that can be used for municipal use. And so part of the funding goes to using installing center pivots and really just being more efficient with the water use for the farmers. And so we're very, very happy with that. We are in the process now of actually closing on a water deal, and we've already closed on one water deal. So really, really has been a good program for us so far. And then the final bullet there is really maximizing our local water supplies. And we just finished our Tullifson water treatment plant upgrades, really so that we can take the varied water supplies. That water typically tends to be high in fluoride. And so we really want flexibility. Sometimes there's high turbidity. We really want the flexibility to be able to treat whatever water comes in, and we can really maximize the use of that water supplies. And what's not shown on here is our conservation demand management program. And we do have a goal of 11,000 to 13,000 acre feet per year reduction due to conservation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on another slide. So the Colorado River is a very important source of supply for us. That provides approximately 70% of our water for the city of Colorado Springs. And some of that is really because we can reuse that water supply. And as you're, I'm sure, aware that the Colorado River, we are seeing a 22-year drought, and this is probably one of the most significant periods in the 1,200-year history. And so we've been having lots of conversations about what that looks like for us. What does our contingency plan look like, and how are we going to meet our community's needs? And so there's 7 basin states that are part of the compact. The upper basin is Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, and the lower basin is Nevada, Arizona, California. And there's also water supplies that go to Mexico. There are also 30 federally recognized tribes that get about 20% of their water from the Colorado. So it's a very significant water supply for not only us, but for many, many areas. And so we have been talking with a lot of coordinating on the Front Range. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the MOU that we have been participating in on how we're going to address that, but also how we're working with other states and really how do we solve the water availability problems on the Colorado River. So I want to talk a little bit of what we're doing around mitigation. And as part of our sustainable water plan, we did plan for the Colorado River situation, and we actually assumed some sort of percentage of curtailment of the Colorado River. So this is not something that we knew this was going on. This is something we've been planning for, and so we have been mitigating for some of these risks. And that's where some of the reuse project I mentioned, the direct potable reuse that comes in. We are having conversations with the state level, the water commissioner. We have also been part of an MOU with other Front Range utilities, which I mentioned, and that really is where we're outlining our commitment to the Colorado River, but also how we're going to address the water availability concerns. And so here's some of the ways that we're tackling the Colorado River. And the first one is really around the conservation and how we use our water supplies. And so we do have a water efficiency plan that we are working on. We are looking at actually doubling the percentage that's identified in that plan. We have been talking and working with the city on their Retool Colorado Springs and their Plan COS, where for new homes, there's a limit on how much turf can be put in. Working very closely with the landscape community on native grasses, what that looks like. And so really our role is going to be to partner and educate on what this could look like. We want to do that smartly. We want to, again, be able to make sure that we are being smart on how we address the water shortage issue. Another area, and I've talked a little bit about this, is making sure that we have a diversification of our water supplies. And so the Arkansas and the SDS pipeline, those were key strategic moves that we made in our community to make sure we could diversify our water supplies. And so that water sharing program is very important to us. Working with Benton County, having the partner, this is one of the first partnerships like this, water sharing programs in the state. We feel like it's a model. We feel like it's very mutually beneficial and again, a model for within the state.
I might, a question on that, maybe not a question, but a comment, maybe you can respond to it. I mean, we certainly saw play out in the press, a controversial activity with Douglas County and the San Luis Valley that ultimately resulted in, I think, Douglas County's proposal just being discontinued at that point. I find it interesting that that became so controversial, and at the same time, you're actually successfully negotiate an IGA with Benton County. So what is it that we're doing different that allows for our ability to kind of team or partner with other counties that don't produce these public controversies?
So we worked for over 4 years with Benton County on the IGA, and the IGA is really looking out for their interest. And so there's provisions in the IGA where we're helping with their records around where the water is, and it's not one-sided. And I believe it's really through that partnership that we've really been able to build that relationship, and I believe trust as well. That's really where I feel like we've been able to make a lot of progress.
I appreciate that. So you've been working with Benton County 40 years. That's a long time.
It is.
So you've got a relationship that's established, and that apparently, I have to believe that's pretty helpful.
It is.
Yeah.
We believe so as well.
Okay, thanks.
And then I mentioned for diversification of supplies is really maximizing our local supplies. Those supplies, if we don't use them when they're going by down Fountain Creek, then we lose them. And so it's really important that we maximize. And so really we've emphasized the importance of using those supplies and then making sure we optimize their use as well. And then I also mentioned how we are pursuing some additional storage with the expansions of the Montgomery Reservoir, which is also called the Continental Huser, as well as the Clear Creek Reservoir. So this takes me into we call it the water ordinance that I'd like to just share with you and give you a little bit of highlights on what's included in the ordinance. But before I do that, I would like to just hit on the city code, and it's listed here. And our city code right now does reference surplus water and projected need for foreseeable future. And really what we are trying to do in this water ordinance is to define what some of those terms mean. And so what the ordinance highlights really is that there's about 4 different key areas that I'd like to hit on. And the first is that the city council approval will require a supermajority, or at least 66% of the council members present, finding that the proposed water extension is warranted based on substantial and written record. Okay, so that's the first criteria. The second is that the city's available water supply will meet 130% of existing usage. And that right now is being calculated at a 3-year rolling average. And that's for water within the city limits. So basically, you would have to maintain 130% of our available water supplies for within city limits. The way this is written now, anything above the 130% could be considered for outside city limits based on the supermajority vote. There is also provisions in the ordinance that there will not be less than 25% of the perimeter of the existing area is contiguous with the city. And currently that is at 16%, so that is an increase of continuity to the perimeter of the city. And then there's also provisions in the ordinance that the city council can vote to allow water service extensions when there is unique or extraordinary circumstances that are critical to meet the needs of the city. Also, if there's areas such as enclaves, they can be approved, and also for areas that are owned or leased by the city or an extension will have, if there's a de minimis water use, those also can be considered as part of this ordinance. So I know there's a lot in that. I guess what I would like to be able to do is maybe open the discussion on the ordinance and see what kind of questions you might have.
Are there any questions from any of the commissioners regarding the ordinance? And I have a couple, but I'll reserve those in case others do. Yes, Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to kind of, define some of what we're talking about here, when it says the city's available water supply is sufficient to meet at least 130% of existing usage, talk to me about how we're defining supply in this. Is this water rights? Is this capacity based on current infrastructure? How are we using to define supply in those circumstances?
So the available supply that we're referring to is our reliable met demand. And so that's the amount of water that we feel like that we've calculated that we can meet for the community. And so we have that calculation. That'll be something that we will update every year as part of our sustainable water plan and our true-up process. And so we will have that number available. As part of that calculation as well is our current demand of our city. And so we've had many conversations with our board on this. We will be having more conversations on Wednesday about how we calculate that. There's a couple options we've presented. Those options are a 3 or a 5 year average based on normalized water usage for our city. So those are actual values that have been normalized based on the weather. And we would either take an average. Another option would be you could take the max year within those periods. So there's some different options that we've talked about, and the board will be discussing that Wednesday at our utility board meeting.
If I could just ask a follow-up to that. So what I'm really trying to get at, I guess, is certainly there can be available water rights and water that's available, but maybe you don't currently have the infrastructure in place to actually be able to serve that water. So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Is this something that would look at or curtail the ability to build additional infrastructure that would help serve those needs? I guess, if it's only at, current infrastructure levels, but bringing in something or some area would provide an opportunity to say, hey, we can increase our infrastructure here and be able to serve additional because we do have the water available, we just don't have the service capacity. So that's what I'm trying to understand is this going to be dependent upon current infrastructure, or does it allow for additional infrastructure to be built if there is water to be utilized through that infrastructure, I guess?
It could be both ways, right? With the Arkansas, we do have the infrastructure, which is our Southern Delivery System pipeline to bring the water up. Now we do have some water exchanges that need to occur through the water rights court, so there is some work we need to do on that side. So again, it really depends on where the water's coming from and the infrastructure we have available. It's a pretty loaded question.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner
Chair.
Geithner, if you have another follow-on, we'll get to you. Okay.
Thank you. So good start intro to all this. My questions, I guess, trying to get additional information is, so the last several years, I don't think anybody really had any indication that there were any concerns about water availability for growth in Colorado Springs. So this is about annexation, but even without annexation, the last several years, there's been this talk in the next 15, 20 years, Colorado Springs is going to be the largest city in Colorado. And I have not heard anybody saying that we didn't have the water capacity to meet those needs until basically a couple weeks ago. So even if without annexation, how much current capacity for growth does the city have based on water rights and current infrastructure? Is it 5,000, 10,000 over the next decade? Just even with the city, this is annexation, but even within the city, what is that? Because I think it took a lot of people by surprise, including myself, what we heard in the last couple of weeks of the limited water resources, when I honestly thought we were in really good shape for the next couple decades.
So the current water usage of our customers ranges between 70,000 acre feet to about 75,000 acre feet. And again, how we calculate that will be discussed with our utility board on Wednesday. So we'll have really that methodology will be shored up, and we'll have that decision made. And so we do have a available water supply of 95,000 acre feet. So that's approximately 20,000 acre feet that we do have available. And so based on how we want to calculate the current usage, that could change our percentage from 127% to 132%. And so again, we have some decisions to make on how we're going to be calculating that and having that discussion Wednesday. And so again, this is really about how much water we want to reserve for inside city growth. And that surplus, really putting definition around that surplus.
So how many residents is that, or households is that?
So it's typically, the 20,000 is about, oh boy. Yeah.
I think it's always a challenge to do math from the podium.
Well, and she's doing that. Let me respond to a couple of the other parts of that. So, as you see, 7.6.203, that's the existing code that's there, and so it's always been part of Colorado Springs code to look at water supply and what's there. To answer a few of the questions, right now there is a significant amount of undeveloped land within the city. It's Banning Lewis, I think their estimate is about 175,000 people that would be added to the city population. That's give or take. I haven't seen the actual floor plans or anything else yet. And there are some other areas as well that are still undeveloped within the city. In some cases, those are infill projects. And in some cases, those are redevelopment projects. So you've certainly seen a number of residents added in the downtown area if you were at the downtown partnership event recently. Where several thousand folks have been added in areas that were developed 150 years ago or thereabouts. So roughly, we use about 75,000. I use that as a simple math. We have 500,000 people. So the simplest way to translate it is 15,000 acre feet for 100,000 people. Now, there are variations that Lisa can take you through in permutations that will make your head roll because we count them different ways at different times. But basically, so when you talk about a 20,000 acre foot surplus at the present time, it's enough for about 133,000 people. And let me talk about why, when we look at whether the existing ordinance, which has been in existence for a number of years, there's a projected available water surplus at the time of request, but the part we haven't ever defined before in ordinance is, what does it mean when you say in paragraph D, the existing and projected water facilities are expected to be sufficient for the present and projected needs for the foreseeable future? And we've never defined what that, but that has always been part of the city code, that we have to look at both the present and projected needs. Those of you who have been here for a while remember the Southern Delivery System. That was a decade plus long process. So when you're looking at projected growth, you have to plan for that. And so we've just left it there until recently. And have there been some changes? Sure. If you've watched the news, you've noticed the federal government's made a number of significant announcements with respect to the Colorado River. That impacts by far our largest water supply. And so there has been a move to say, should we define this better than just saying, whatever that means, present and projected needs in the foreseeable future? I'm not sure what that means. And so should we define it more? And so that's what the ordinance does. It doesn't change the city policy. It simply defines what the city policy is. When we say, what are the present and projected needs? Well, what number should we use? Should we use build out of the entire city? In which case, we don't have enough. But it would also be fiscally imprudent to build facilities for people that might not live here for 50 years. So I live in Briargate. It was annexed into the city, I don't know, 40 years ago. They're finally building it out, the last bits. We just approved a couple projects in Briargate in the last few months on city council. So when you're looking at a 40 to 50 year build out of Banning Lewis, which is one of those large undeveloped parcels, how much do you reserve and how much do you plan ahead? And so what this is trying to say in the draft ordinance is to say, let's talk about real numbers so that they're fair, so that everybody knows what they are. Because this, the current one, is kind of ad hoc. Yeah, we think we got enough. Yeah, we don't. Let's tell people what numbers we're looking at and what makes sense to examine. And there's two things that surplus does. One of them is allows for building in existing areas. We don't want to be in a situation where someone has annexed in and then we say, yes, you've annexed in, but you can't build anything. And so what is that runway you need to acquire the additional water rights, as Lisa was talking about, and then build the infrastructure necessary to acquire it? The other part of that we're looking at is what happens if we don't have as much water. And so there's two reasons why you want that buffer. One is to adjust for what might happen in the Colorado, and the other is to adjust for how much you need for the growth. One of the things that you should be aware of, that when Lisa talks about our conservation process, we use the same amount of water now that we did 30 years ago. Using the same amount of water as we did when I moved to Colorado Springs in 1992. Some of you might have noticed we've grown a little bit since then. And part of that is because we have been very successful in the conservation efforts we've made. Some of that is market driven, where we have changed. So if you're using more water, you pay more, and letting the market determine that and people make their own individual choices. And part of it is you've seen lots diminish in size through people's voluntary decisions. And some of it is we're much more water efficient on our internal usage than we used to be. So all of that is part of the discussion of the ordinance. And yeah, we didn't get the work session scheduled as early as I'd hoped for. But all we have done at this point is release the ordinance for public comment. We are not voting on it until next year, probably early next year, probably in January. And so it's part of our purpose in being here. As you know, when we discussed the initial desire to have the visit, it just took us a couple months to get that scheduled on everybody's calendars.
Yeah, thank you. And I actually have a question as well as about the 130% itself, because not knowing what internal conversations the city may have been having about that, and because I don't really understand why it was 30%, 130%, it seems arbitrary to me. Now, you know, something that may be plausible is you're anticipating the extra 30% is for the projected growth of the areas that have already been annexed. And maybe that's roughly the number. That would be like Banning Lewis and whatever other infill you do, but I do see a head shaking no, so I'm not quite sure how 30% was selected. And then it does beg the question as well, because things will change over time. So, you know, for the sake of argument, I'm not saying the city may do this, but if you were to annex another Banning Lewis sized area, that number might be woefully insufficient. On the other side of the coin, if you were to have some kind of a windfall in negotiation with other counties and be able to increase capacity 30%, or that number might be too much. So how was the 130% derived?
So I'll address that a little bit, then turn it over to Lisa to say it more. Right now, it's essentially roughly close to the delta between what we have and what we use. And so we just kind of did a snapshot of where we are. So right now we use about 75,000, 73,000, I think is maybe where we assess as the official one, which is an average. We have about 95,000 that we produce and have access to, and that's about 130% difference. So that's where it comes in. The number, there's nothing, I wouldn't call it arbitrary because it is based in part on where we actually are at the present time. But there's nothing magical at 130 versus 131 or 128. What I will tell you is this, 100% would be absurd. That means if a single droplet doesn't come through, someone doesn't get water when they turn on the tap. So if we have now, mind you, we have 3 years of storage, so we've got some capacity, but eventually you'd get to that stage. So 100% doesn't make sense, because then you're saying no water taps until we go buy some more water. On the other hand, if you said, I want to have enough for everything that might annex in the future, or even just all of Banning Lewis, you would have to have significantly more water than we have now, in some cases for property that isn't going to develop for 40 or 50 years. And so that's absurd. Telling the ratepayers now, go pay for these things, even though we're not going to use it for 40 years from now. So what is that number in between? That's part of what we're engaged in this public dialogue for. And so you're adjusting both growth, recognizing it takes time to get additional water, and we're looking at fluctuations in the Colorado River that historically we've never had to face before. And so, yes, things have changed over the last few years. I've never seen a federal court order or a federal administrator order saying these types of curtailments have to take place, so we have to plan for it. Now, you said, what happens if we acquire more water? Well, that's the beauty of using the percentage. If we acquired more water, let's say that some wonderful person left us a bequest of 50,000 acre feet. I don't think that would happen. Then suddenly that's pretty easy to meet that 130% because we now have this extra 50,000 acre feet in the system. And so it fluctuates with declining water availability and increasing water availability. And that's why it's defined as a percentage as opposed to a number, because that adjusts and fluctuates as our water supply adjusts and as our water usage varies. It's also, and this is the other important part, an ordinance, which means if we go forward and we look at it and we say, hey, this isn't working out quite right, we have the ability to make adjustments in it. And so those are a couple of things. Let me, Lisa, address some more of that, but I wanted to provide you a little.
Yeah, Wayne did a really good job on that. Again, we've had a lot of conversations about what is the right percentage, and some of what we've been talking about is what we see as our growth patterns. It's typically been about 1.5%, and looking at maybe a period of 10 years. If you look at that, in addition to some of the modeling and analysis we've done, we feel like the 130% seems to be about the right percentage for us. And Wayne really brought up a really good point. It's really the timing around when we acquire water rights and water resources. It doesn't make sense to go ahead and, double our water resources right now, because again, we're paying for that much sooner than we probably need them. And also we need to distribute those costs to those customers that actually will be using those water rights. So there is a time at which we really need to acquire those rights.
Yes, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you. So, and because like I said, the number, it's not arbitrary, but it does seem the council, the board for the utilities and the city council would be taking recommendations from staff. The city council can only reject annexations. So why is there a need for the ordinance to say maybe you shouldn't deny annexations? They already have that authority based on recommendations. So, I mean, is this adding another level that it's not necessarily necessary, since staff should already be making these recommendations. We don't have the water for this annexation.
And again, what this does is this puts some definition around these terms. You know, how much is surplus? How much should we be holding for within city limits versus allowing for outside? You know, again, for the present and projected needs. So I do believe this is a good revision, additional step. It gives us some clarity around what is the correct parameters that we should be evaluating these annexations around.
Well, and I think I would say, I think it is an appropriate, you're just thinking for me, I mean, it's the city's decision, of course, but the city and CSU's decision, but it does make sense to me to be doing something in this arena, because you do have in the current code the word projected, and that isn't deeply defined in any way. So to try to get to that, I think that does make a ton of sense. Having said that, I'm still not 100% sure why 30% over existing usage is the right risk measurement, you know, for the city. Because obviously, I think in some cases there might be some infill that would change that, or it might be the city is forced to reduce supply because of a broader agreement on the Colorado River of some type, right? So all of those, it's hard to anticipate what those would mean, but there can be maybe some kind of measures of risk in all of that, in which case then you would want to manage that risk. You know, and to make something up there, because I don't know where those numbers would be, but some percentage of that 30% would be risk for being told you're going to take less water because of Colorado River, and then another part would be, you know, infill capacity that you would want to have. So that you can do infill. And then whatever is left over whatever number is ultimately selected is what you would be making available for projects that are outside the city jurisdiction. So this is what you're providing. So I think for lack of having anything else or having anything more sophisticated, picking what your current supply and your current usage is certainly a way to do it. I'll just make the point, I'm not 100% sure that can really get you to measuring all the right risks that are out there, and what your infill needs might be. That would be a capacity of water that you would want to retain before you do something outside city jurisdiction. And so maybe there's a way to get to a greater level of sophistication on that. And I would bet that's almost exactly the kind of conversation you're going to be having, right?
Yes, and we actually are putting together some operating orders on how this will be calculated, so it'll be very clear, and we will keep refining it based on some of those discussions.
Okay. Are there other questions from any? Yes, Commissioner Geithner.
Just to follow up on this, and it's obviously a very complicated question. I think that is trying to kind of make sense of what all these numbers are and what it means. I know one of the conversations that I have often with some of the smaller water districts in my areas, we hear this all the time: we're running out of water, we're running out of water. What does that mean? Is it actually that we don't have water? Is it actually that we can't transport water? Is it that, you know, it's not economically viable? There are all of these kind of questions around what it means when people say they're concerned about water. And so, you know, as we were talking about these calculations, a couple of things that are coming to mind, we're talking about what's available from the Colorado River. But if you could kind of clarify from the sense of, you know, SDS was a huge project. I think for many of us, I can't speak for everyone here, but I know as a citizen, you know, hearing about SDS was kind of this, hey, this is going to solve all of our water needs, right? This is a long-term solution that's going to bring so much water here, we're not going to have concerns about that. To fast forwarding not too long down the road, and having some more of these conversations about what does that actually mean. So in terms of when we're talking about different numbers here and trying to understand where the bottleneck is, I guess, is what I'm getting to. Where is the bottleneck? Is it the water we're able to get from Colorado River? When we're talking about SDS, what is the capacity of the actual pipeline? What is the bottleneck of having the amount of water that we have now? Is it water rights? Is it infrastructure capacity? What are those obstacles?
So the obstacle that I would simplify it down to is really the water molecule. And it's the infrastructure's not always the challenge. SDS, we do have the conveyance system. Now, that was really more of a conveyance project. The Arkansas exchanges that we are working with Benton County on will allow us to utilize the capacity of that pipe. But really, it's about increasing the water rights that we have, the water molecules that we can bring to our community.
Lisa's correct on that, and Commissioner Geithner, you've asked, I think, one of the correct questions, which is it that you don't have the water, or you don't have the water, the way to get the water here? And one of the things SDS did, it was built over capacity because we anticipated acquiring additional water rights over time that would enable us to use that system to its fullest capacity. We have transbasin diversion water rights now. We have conveyance systems that are not running at full capacity. A lot of times we're using gravity feed. We do have the ability to pump at a faster rate should we need to do that. And so Southern Delivery System was a huge component of making sure we had the transmission system. Now we're in the process of acquiring the water rights to put in that transmission system. Because if you don't have the water molecules, as Lisa was saying, it's not as effective. And so part of what we did with your colleagues in Benton County is we signed an agreement that sets forth the process rather than go through the, why am I blanking, the 1041. It's off by 40. The 1040 or 39. The 1041 process, instead we did an IGA with them that says, if you acquire water rights, here's the process you need to use. And one of the beauties that we've done, because I know some of you have been out in the Eastern Plains and you've seen what happens when you use the old buy and dry method, which is what utilities and municipalities used to do. They'd go in, buy the farm, take all the water, leave the dry land there. What we're doing instead is we're increasing the efficiency of their irrigation system. Instead of flood irrigation, where you lose a lot through evaporation, changing it to a center pivot irrigation system. And so the farmer's still producing just as much as they were before, or in some cases more, and we're buying the water that's saved. And so it's a win-win with our partners in the Arkansas Valley. It's one of the exciting things that we've done. You may be saying, where's some of that money coming from? Well, since I've been on Utilities Board, we added a $5,700 water resource fee more than a year ago to say we're going to have to acquire more water. So that discussion has certainly been going on during the entire time I've been on the board. And we said we're going to acquire more water, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to charge an additional fee on each home that is developed, each building permit, that allows us then to build a bank to go forward and buy the actual water rights. So we have the conveyance ability. We sometimes have to go through, as Lisa was saying, the complicated process of transferring, how we can get the water molecules to here, but that conveyance system, Southern Delivery System gives, but we still have to buy the water molecules that go in it in order to fully develop. And we built the whole system at one time, with the exception of some pumps and other things, for those of you who were on the last water tour with us, because it doesn't make sense to add an inch to the pipe each year. So you build the whole pipe at one time. But what does make sense to do as you need it is to buy the additional water rights that fill that pipe, because those you buy in chunks. A couple thousand acre feet here, 500 acre feet there. And that's the process we're using. What we don't have anywhere in Colorado that I know of is extra water that's not being used by somebody. And so it really is, you're going into a farmer and saying, how can we help you be efficient and let us buy the water that we save you so that you still produce, still have as much tax revenue going into Los Animas as you did before. People still coming in and buying stuff at the local Tasty Freeze and the Dairy Queen and everything else. But that we are able then to buy that water that is saved, and it's a win-win for the communities. And that's why Bill Long, former Commissioner Bill Long, was part of the negotiation process, and then the 3 current commissioners. And they went through an extensive public hearing because this is something that had not been done before. It actually sets the model for what you can see going forward as we as a state struggle with this, not just in Colorado Springs. Our partners in some of these projects are Aurora and other communities as well. And so we as a state have to figure out how we make the same amount of water go farther for more people. And now that we look at what happens in the Colorado, a less amount of water go forward for the same amount of people, or an increasing amount.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments with regard to, certainly SDS, huge improvement in conveyance. And to your point, Councilman, purchasing water rights is what will help to fill the conveyance, and you've got the capacity, so it's great. It does seem to me, and you guys have alluded to it, there's a third leg on the stool here, and that's reusing the molecules you already own. I just feel like that is going to become increasingly important, particularly if we end up having trouble securing sufficient water rights. Or, by the way, I appreciate, Wayne, your comments about how you were working with Bent County, because doing that in such a way where they win also is so important. And I like that it was done that way. But eventually you get to a point where you're squeezing a turnip and there's nothing else to get out of there. So water, yeah, that's my analogy for the day, I guess. But water reuse becomes the third leg because you've already conveyed the water, you've already procured the water is here, and with the right processing, you get to use what you already own over and over.
I'll at least address the reuse component because that's important. But I will say, there's still water left in the turnip, to use your example. I was at a Club 20 meeting about 1.5 years ago, and they were talking about the same possibility of what we're doing on the Arkansas being able to be done on the Colorado. Most of the senior water rights in Colorado are owned by agriculture. And most of the most senior water rights didn't have to be very efficient in how they used that water when they acquired it in the 1800s. And so they were looking for what's the easiest way. And so there is a significantly much more than is necessary flood irrigation taking place in our state that through some changes. And that doesn't even get into the more complex types of irrigation that they use in Israel and other places to ensure that. So I do think there is additional water to be obtained, and that's part of the reason we've bought about 2,500 acre feet in Bent County so far. But that's why the agreement was for 15,000, because we think even in that one county, there's additional. Let Lisa talk about the reuse we're doing.
Thank you. Oh, Commissioner Gonzalez.
So I just got one more. So based on this proposed ordinance, what would be the largest amount of rooftops you could annex in under this? Allows you to bring in another 500,
So it really
2,000?
Yeah, so it really depends on how we're going to calculate the existing usage. And so we assume about 1 acre foot per year for 3 single family equivalents. And let me see here. So I wish I had that number in front of me. I don't have my calculator.
Well, while she's doing that, let me just note that what you see there is one way, but the ordinance has, as Lisa alluded to, several other ways. So first, if there is a significant circumstance, unique and extraordinary circumstance, then the 130% limit doesn't apply. That would include things, and I'll throw out some things historically that I think would have met that. This is the world according to Wayne in this case. But I think a council could very well find that unique and extraordinary circumstance existed for the True North annexation, for the United States Air Force Academy Visitor Center, for the Broadmoor annexation when it took place as a flagpole annexation. Frankly, I think the city should have done that, but this is long before I was in city government. With respect to the Walmart and Sam's Club, they're at the northwest corner of Academy and I-25. Instead, Fountain came in and took that, even though it's nowhere near the city of Fountain. So that's one extraordinary circumstance. The other extraordinary, you talked about infill projects. Infill specifically exempted from the 130% requirement. And so if You had a enclave that wanted to come in. We've seen certainly in Park Vista, we've seen a few properties come in over time. But if you had others come in, they would be exempt from this process. So it's something that is de minimis in impact. And so this is the general rule, but there are exceptions there. And so when you ask Commissioner for the number of rooftops that could come in, it all depends first what the numbers you're using. Second, what changes in our water supply, because we've just bought 2,000 more acre feet in the city that isn't included in that base yet. And so as we continue to buy water rights, that number will continue to increase. And that's really what our anticipated plan is, which is why we did the Bent County agreement for significantly more than we've acquired to date. But that's the process we're going through. And then, Lisa, you've got some
Yes, I got
numbers.
some numbers. Okay. So again, this is going to be based on how we calculate our existing usage, but if we are assuming an existing usage of 72,000 acre feet per year for City of Colorado Springs, and we times that by 130%, that gives us a overall usage available of 93,600. Our reliability met demand is 95,000, so that delta is about 1,400 acre feet. We assume 3 single-family equivalents per acre foot per year. That equates to about 4,200 single-family equivalents that we could add. And we currently have 2,500 to 3,000. Again, it's dropped off now with some of the economy, but that gives you some idea of what that we could add.
The difficult part of that is that's just a snapshot in time, because other, maybe future home construction would be more efficient at water use, and as technologies maybe improve, and then you're pursuing water supply, and so these numbers are going to continue to vary. So it almost like might be 4,200 homes this year, then something happens and a significant water right is secured and conveyance can deliver, and then it's 5,800 homes or something.
Yeah,
It's
and
hard.
so when we go through all that process and this 2,500 acre feet we've just bought in the Arkansas Valley comes in, then you multiply that by 130%, and so you get roughly, 3,200 times 3, so that's another 9,600 homes. So it really is, and that's why we're using a percentage here, so it adjusts as we make adjustments in our water supply. On the other hand, if the Colorado River produces significantly less, that will adjust it the other way. And so the reason we're using the percentages, so it's reflecting actual reality of water production and what we do, and it adjusts as we continue to acquire water rights. We've been pretty aggressive about doing that since I joined the board at CSU. And so we will continue to do that and try to find ways that provide that win-win scenario. But yeah, the snapshot of 4,200 at the moment, when that 2,500 acre feet we just bought is able to be realized and we go through the processes, if that indeed increases our water supply by 2,500, then that increases the number of homes over time if we become more efficient. And so one of the things Lisa referred to was the change in our zoning code that reduces the amount of, and it's not all turf, it's non-native turf. So you can still use blue gamma grass and other things that if you look at our water facility over on Mesa, and I forget the official name of it, Conservation Center. I always think of that's where I lived because I grew up on the Conservation and Research Center in Front Royal, Virginia, so it's hard for me. But when you look at that and you say, let's say that this new ordinance goes into effect and we have less water usage, and maybe you get 4 homes per acre. And to the extent you shift it away from outdoor use, that's the water that goes away. That's evaporated. It doesn't reuse. The water you use, for most of us, when you take a shower or a bath, that water goes down the drain, but it's then recaptured and we're able to use that. And much of that water we get to count and use multiple times because we can use it to exhaustion if it comes from a different water basin. So there are things that we are doing now, but as our usage changes, as we become more efficient, it frees up more opportunities for things to come in. So that's what we're doing.
Would the CSU board have flexibility with that in considering future projects? I'm just going to make up a scenario for you here, but it'll be to make the point. Let's say you get to a point where you don't have the capacity. Let's say you've picked 130%. That ends up being what you voted in. And you have no additional capacity at a particular point in time. So your inclination, if you're going to stand on that 130%, would be to not approve, providing water to a developer that's outside city jurisdiction. But you also know about 2 years from now, you're going to complete a 8,000 acre feet water reuse project, in which case you can make up for it, and you have that confidence. So you can't make the 130%, but you will be able to do it. So there just seems to be these extenuating circumstances where this thing is constantly in flux, and I just have to believe that you would want to have the flexibility for something like that.
Which is why the next section that's not shown up on the slide right now is a unique and extraordinary circumstance. And so that is an exception to the 130%. And I would say if we know we're going to be suddenly having 8,000 more acre feet through a massive reuse project that's almost there, I think that could meet that unique and extraordinary circumstance. So that's why it is proposed with some language that allows council some flexibility going forward. But the burden then becomes the potential annexor's argument to make, or city staff's argument to make, to say why this is a unique circumstance. But certainly it's there. We did not craft the draft ordinance to absolutely lock in, because there are these exceptions that are there. The other thing you could do is you could say, depending on how much this particular project is, it has a de minimis impact, particularly since in 2 years from now, to use your example, 8,000 more acre feet are going to be available. So all that is designed to address things. So it's not designed to lock an ironclad system that drags you down. It's designed to say, here's our plan. If you're going to do something different, you got to meet one of these exceptions and make the argument. And so perhaps the simplest example, because most of you were here when the county participated in the City for Champions project with the United States Air Force Academy. To do that, and part of what had to meet the definition is it was blighted, meaning under state statute, the absence of infrastructure and the absence of services counts as blight, even though when you look at the beautiful land, it doesn't immediately come to mind. But the statute provided some flexibility to get there and address what I think is going to be a pretty significant addition to our community when it's completed. And we appreciate your partnership in that. But it does have some flexibility to allow those significant things or other extraordinary circumstances to be considered. The current law does too. It's just paragraph D of the current provision doesn't say what you use as a starting point. This is saying this is the starting point. You got to be able to show some exception or some ability to get there. And so someone could argue that, yes, you've just bought 2,500 acre feet in the Arkansas. No, it's not counted in your reliably met demand yet, reliably met supply, but we think it should be. And council has some flexibility, but it requires the discussion to take place. And really, perhaps more important than anything else, is that honing in that requirement for the discussion in front of city council to say, you got to talk about water more than just yeah, there's some. where we're actually talking about real decisions and real discussion. And to your point, we've got a robust public process going on. It's part of why we're here. It's also part of why we have been visiting with folks at HBA and other interested parties to get their input. As Steve Durham said in the Gazette, you can't sell what you don't have. And so we want to make sure we're addressing those needs going forward. And that's where we're at. And so we're so glad that you gave us this opportunity. We're happy to keep talking about water for as long as you like. We do want to mention a few of the other things we do before we finish, though.
I appreciate that. And I think it is, unless there's a pressing question, please, Commissioner.
I do have a pressing question. Thank you. So, as I'm reading this, the current city code and the proposed ordinance and the conditions for annexation, we're focusing around this code. But I think for me, I'm trying to understand how this might relate to delivery outside of the city boundaries. That's been a topic that has come up and is, of course, of interest to surrounding areas. As you've noted, you do provide services outside of the city boundaries. So how will that factor into this change, or will it all, or what is the current position of CSU related to those things very specifically?
So let me address generally and then let Lisa address more specifically. When you look at some of the areas we're providing water to, in some cases, you had a failing district that we stepped in and worked with in a partnership. In other areas, Denali comes to mind. Our former senior water individual, Wayne Vandeshear, runs Denali now. He was a resident of the Glen Eagle area, and he goes, we really should come up with a way to get water here so we're not pulling out of the Dawson and Denver aquifers. And so Denali entered into an agreement with Colorado Springs Utilities. They bought some water, and then we agreed to convey, treat, and deliver that water to them. And so certainly you're going to have folks working outside the city limits on that, just like we did with Denali. A lot of times that sometimes means you need some capacity to store, because we are much more open to conveying, treating, and delivering water if you've got the capacity to store it, so that we can do it at a time we're not using the system to convey our water. The other part of that is, as we look at extraordinary circumstances. So if Space Force decided they wanted their own academy and they didn't want to be part of the Air Force Academy, would our community compete for that? Absolutely. At least I'm hoping we would. And so if that was going to be located outside the city limits and they said, but we want city water, we'd do exactly what we did with the Air Force Academy decades ago, where Colorado Springs Utilities went out and developed additional water, developed an additional conveyance system so that we would have the water to provide for the Air Force Academy, even though it didn't annex into the city. So yes, we would still have that flexibility to address critical needs. We've done it before, and literally that is why some of the conveyance systems were built, so that we could compete for the Air Force Academy when they raised the question of would there be enough water. So would we do that for a Space Force? I'm not saying there's going to be a Space Force Academy. This is not an announcement. I'm just using that as an example of where CSU aggressively worked to support the unincorporated part of the county, because we thought it was for the benefit of our whole community. And we'll continue to look at things like that. Are there challenges? Sure. And are our ratepayers always going to be our first priority? Yes. But we believe there are ways to do partnerships, and we will continue to do that going forward. Thanks for the question, Commissioner. Lisa.
I would just add that we are in talks with a surrounding municipality around supplying them water. And what we have told them is, if they have the water rights or the water molecules, we will work with them to convey, treat, and deliver that water to them. And so again, it really comes down to the water molecules and having that available. And then we're definitely open to partnering.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll just ask if Commissioner Williams, if you have any questions at this time. I haven't been looking up at the screen to see if you had your hand raised.
No, most of my questions got answered. So I know that if you do use your system outside of Colorado Springs, that you do pay a tariff type fee to be able to use that outside of Colorado Springs. But other than that, I think everyone else has asked my questions. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's continue.
Okay. So I'm going to shift gears now. Wrong way there. To the wastewater. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the Northern Monument Creek Interceptor. And it's a wastewater project that we have been working with some northern entities on. We started with 6 entities, and now we are working primarily with Forest Lakes and Triview. And this is really to construct a 30-inch diameter pipeline and interceptor sewer adjacent to the Air Force Academy, and to collect water and bring it to our J.D. Phillips wastewater treatment plant just south of Mark Davley and Garden of the Gods. And there's a couple benefits to us that really makes this project very valuable for Colorado Springs, and that includes the elimination of some lift stations. And so this system would be gravity, and anytime you can have a gravity system, you're in much better shape than if you have a pump system for resiliency. And so that is definitely a positive for us. And then really there's some benefits for the northern entities, and that has to do with some of the regulations, the wastewater stream standards. And so there's some regulations that are pretty stringent that would require treating their effluent to drinking water standards. So again, there's some value for them partnering with us and us doing some of those improvements together. So I just wanted to mention that. It's a project right now that we're in the design phase. We should have a 30% design next year. We're going to have another check-in with the partners and make sure everybody is still good to go based on some cost estimates and where we're going with the project. Any questions before I move on to electric?
Any questions? Looks like we're good. Please proceed.
Okay, so I want to spend some time talking to you a little bit about the changing energy landscape. And we've had a pretty fast-moving couple years in this area as we've moved to renewables. But as you might recall, we actually did a sustainable energy plan similar to our sustainable water plan, where we really looked at what does the future look like for our generation, how we're going to provide energy to our community. And so we also had a very robust public process. We engaged the public, also our utility board, and you can see our energy vision here, along with our pillars of really what we focused on. Of course, economics were very important, the environment, how do we have sustainable solutions, also resiliency with the renewables, what does that look like, how do we make sure we maintain reliability for our customers, and then also moving forward just with innovation for our community. And so we, again, our sustainable energy plan was guided by our energy vision. It was a 2-year process. You can see here really the attributes that went into the criteria at which we evaluated various energy replacements, and so of course reliability is a big one for us, as well as cost, and then you can see the other ones as well. But really what really drove a lot of our direction was some of the clean energy plan state legislation that came out, and that was really meeting an 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, and those were based on levels that we saw in 2005. And then the next round of the standard is meeting 90% by 2050. And so really what came out of that, based on that legislation, was the closure of Drake, and we actually we'll be starting up our natural gas generators, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, in 2023 first quarter.
And you'll get to it, but the natural gas generator, will it be on the Drake facility?
Yes, so right now we have 6 units. If you drive by there, you'll see 6 stacks there with 6 natural gas generators. They're 27 megawatts each. They're General Electric, and they are very quick start units, very valuable to our fleet. Now with the coal units we have, it takes a lot longer to get those units started up, up to 13 hours to get a startup of those units. And this is really valuable for us. You can start these natural gas generators in like 5 to 10 minutes, and which is really valuable for us as we have renewables such as wind and solar in our system. Some other benefits with the natural gas is really the lower operation and maintenance cost. When we closed the Drake power plant, there were approximately 40 employees that we actually redistributed within our organization. They have very valuable skills, and so some of them became gas pipe fitters, some worked for a water plant, had career changes, some became substation techs. And so we were able to hold on to all those skilled employees and train them up for new jobs within our organization. But going back to Drake, we ceased operations in September of this year. And we, again, are finishing the work on the natural gas generators. Those should be commissioned in first quarter of 23. And we're just really excited to get those generators online.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
Sure.
it might be a matter of semantics, but when you say closing the Drake power plant, you still have the 6 natural gas generators. So it's not, you didn't
We
close
closed the
Drake,
coal
you just
plant.
closed the coal.
Yeah, we closed the coal,
Yeah.
and we have some transmission upgrades to complete from our Kelker substation, which is on Hancock and Academy, and a transmission line that goes all the way from that substation up to, there's another substation on the Drake site that we need to complete that upgrade of that transmission line before we can actually move those units out of the Drake site. And so that we're anticipating those will be moved by approximately 2027.
And you might have it in a future chart. Where are they going?
So we're still working on that and talking through some of the specifics on that.
Okay, thanks.
Just add a little bit to that. So there were a couple aspects that went into the decision to close Drake. One of those is many of our transmission lines were based on a major power generation facility at that location. And so that's why you still have the replacement, the 6 27 megawatt units there. Part of the goal in distributing them across the community is to work with our military bases to provide more secure power. And so one of the sites we anticipate moving, I think one of these units to is over by the airport that would then have secure underground transmission to Peterson Space Force Base. So making a resilient ability for our armed services to continue to have power supply. Another one we anticipate being located near Fort Carson for that same reason, near or on. And so that's part of that ongoing negotiation. Our goal here, it's more efficient if the power is generated closer, so you lose a little bit through the transmission of it, but more importantly, to also have that resilience. So you don't have a single line that if it's taken down, you shut down power to much of the community. But instead, and particularly for those that need to continue operating in a crisis, like Space Force Base and the home of Northcom, being one of the things that we're doing to try to help that process. It's also one of the things that, as we've met with military members, and I think, Commissioner, you were with us when we were at Boeing headquarters on the chamber trip, and they were talking about some of the work we're doing, not just in the generation at Fort Carson, but also taking over their transmission lines so that we're able to do that more efficiently for them. So we do work closely with our bases. But that's part of the goal here as well, is to help support our military and be a partner as we continue to seek additional defense missions in our community.
So the 6 are going to be distributed around instead of, say, for example, maybe all placed at Nixon or something.
That is correct. They will definitely be distributed around. They will not all be placed at Nixon. The other things I note in terms of Martin Drake, there were Lisa mentioned one of the important factors, which is to meet the environmental requirements. And she did allude to the fact it was not a very efficient way to generate power anymore. I could pick any department here at the county, and in almost every single department, your largest cost is your personnel cost. And that's going to be true whether it's, I think, operating a jail or operating a motor vehicle office, which I know a little bit more about. It is the actual personnel cost. And so by switching to something that requires much fewer personnel, we can generate power less expensively than we did using Drake. And so Drake was very expensive and it was no longer economically viable. And that's true even because we did this study, we went back and looked at, well, but natural gas prices have gone up under the current administration. Even with those higher prices, still more efficient to generate using natural gas than it was using Martin Drake, because it was a venerable, wonderful place for, I think, 97 years. But it really was no longer a very efficient way to generate power, in part because of large personnel costs. The other thing I note is, in addition to the environmental factors, the economic costs, it also provides an opportunity for redevelopment in the downtown area. And it is, I say this as someone whose father-in-laws are both or father-in-law and father are engineers, and we love, power plants and exciting, but it wasn't the best entrance to our community. And so we are working with community groups and others over time to say, how do we redevelop the Drake site? And so it also had that other impact. But the economics for a number of us were the major factor, and then meeting the state environmental regulations.
Thank you. Any, Commissioner Geithner?
Yes, thank you. So I appreciate the explanation on specifically the natural gas generators. I was able to go down to Pueblo. Gosh, that's probably been about 2 years ago, not too long after they had kind of established their new site down there, and watching how those generators are put into action very quickly, and how they are able to respond to, yes, power being generated via solar or wind in real time, and get those generators online to meet those needs. I think a couple of things that were interesting that came out of that visit, and I'm curious if we are having those same effects. Number one, they said there's virtually no decent energy production that's going on from wind turbines. In fact, they said that so often it's not during peak times, and so that the energy is often going wasted, which I thought was very interesting. So curious if we've seen the same thing. Number one. And number two is we are also now, the ideas around sustainability, environmental concerns are often changing, and now there's been quite a cry in the state of Colorado to get away from natural gas. So, what are you hearing in that space? How are you preparing to deal with that space? I know it is very clean burning, and the emissions are very reduced, but nevertheless, we're still hearing those demands. So are you hearing that? What is the preparation for that? Do we think that's going to take root? And just kind of your ideas around what is happening on that.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer question number 2, and we'll go back to number 1 because I want to make sure I understand your question. So as for the natural gas, and we really have those greenhouse gas standards that the state has set for us. And so we do have plans to close our Nixon plant by the end of 2029 to meet the 2030 80%. And so we really right now we're in this dilemma where we've got those standards that we need to meet. However, the technology has not kept up with what we need to be able to respond to some of the renewables. And so those are things we're evaluating. I'm going to talk a little bit on the next slide about some more renewables we're adding and a battery. And so we believe that the batteries should help us bridge some of that. But again, that technology is still being developed. And again, we're not the only utility that's in this transition period. When you go to these conferences, all these utilities are dealing with the same challenges. And it's really about us coming together and trying to figure out how we're, really work through those solutions.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you. So there's a reference to more efficient and so less personnel costs. Did you guys cut those costs, the personnel from the utilities?
No, we actually redistributed those employees within our organization where we had needs. And so we hadn't added employees with all the growth we've seen. And so really there were some areas that we really needed to, increase our staffing levels.
But there was not, the personnel savings wasn't actually part of that.
No.
Thank you.
I wanted to go back to your first question. Do you mind I want to make sure I understood what you were asking.
Yeah, sure. So in the case of being down in the plant in Pueblo, they did not have their own wind generation that was online. But for example, out in my district here in El Paso County, we have windmills near Calhan. And one of the things that they said is often they're being asked, can you guys use this energy? Nobody wants to buy this from us right now because it's just not coming at the right times. So are we seeing that consistently? I don't know that you guys are buying wind energy from anywhere, but just is that something that you're seeing? Is it something that you're experiencing?
I think that's, to me, that's a question about base load versus,
It is.
other load that you can get from these renewable. And I'm deeply concerned about this base load delivery, this core massive amount of power that's needed it's very difficult to wrap your head around how wind and solar can deliver that.
Mm-hmm. And so on this slide, I want to hit on what we're doing to address some of that. So in August, we joined the Southwest Power Pool. And so it is a energy imbalance market, which allows us to work with other utility providers or energy providers and balance those resources. And so if one area, and this is all in the Midwest, and so if they have more wind and we need that energy, we might get very cheap power at that point. And so that's how you balance those changes. And that's really why we went into this market, is with the renewable addition. This gives us a lot more flexibility. We do have more natural gas generation than some of the other utilities in this market. And so they were definitely very happy to see us as well, because to help out with the base load. And when those renewables drop off, we can respond quickly. So again, there's really a lot of value by coming together and being part of this energy imbalance market that we just entered.
Yes, please.
And I'm going to guess Wayne might want to answer this one. This is a little more of a policy question perspective. But, given the what I think we all know is a reality, and given some of the studies about our power grid and things that are going on, I think it's fair to say that the push for renewables and some of these alternative energies is a little too aggressive for where we're truly at in the world of technology. So how is CSU making sure their voice is heard and to policymakers and just saying, look, guys, this is not feasible based on technology, and we have to look out for reliability for our customers? How are you guys engaging in that space?
Okay, let me address a couple aspects of that. First, two of the people here are on our government affairs team that's actively working both in DC and in Denver with the state and federal governments. Also, Andy Colosima, who many of you know, heads that area. And so we are aggressively working, and we deal with the state agencies. It's one of the reasons, by the way, when you talk about those 27 gas turbines, they're approved in pretty record amount of time. Because normally there's a very long process to get fossil fuel generation approved, but we were able to get that done very quickly by the state. And so part of it is we are working with the state on issues like that. On the broader policy question, you did raise an important question, Commissioner, and that is there are challenges in our nation as we try to move from older forms of energy generation to some of the newer forms, some of which are very weather dependent. is the wind blowing and is the sun shining are two very important components to wind and solar. We have, as the slide S shows there, renewables do make up about 27% of our energy portfolio, but it's balanced between solar, wind. We also have hydro, which some of you may not be aware, but when we bring that water across the mountains, it's got to come down at some point, and we use that to generate power. And some of the oldest power generation we have in Colorado Springs are some of those hydroelectric sites from bringing the Trans-Basin water over, because we're bringing it down to the low elevation of 6,000 feet. But in terms of this, we have to have the ability for battery backup. By joining the Southwest Power Pool, which I think goes from Texas up to Minnesota, if I remember the map correctly. So and I could be off slightly, but it's a large band. And so the broader the band, the less you're reliant on the weather at one location for that. So that's part of it, is diversifying, which the Southwest Power Pool allows us to do. Part of it is the gas turbines, allowing us to instantly turn on if the sun goes behind clouds or the wind dies down. That's something we couldn't do. It's one of the reasons why the gas turbines are more efficient than Drake, because we could not do that with Drake. And it allows us to then turn off the gas turbines when we have an excess of power coming in, because the wind's blowing everywhere. As you're talking about your constituents out there who are saying, we got this power, will somebody take it? And we can now do that because we aren't generating Drake all the time, and we can just turn down the gas and bring in the wind that's available on the grid. And so all of those are ways we're trying to address it. There are some systemic issues in our nation as we try to make this transition. And one of those is, if the goal of, which is the goal of some people, is to take us completely off gas, it disincentivizes investment in the gas production process. And so we have a refinery, I think it was in New Orleans, it was taken out, or Louisiana, that was taken out by a hurricane a couple of years ago. They haven't rebuilt it because it just doesn't make economic sense if you're not going to have it there for 30 years to get the payback. And so those are some of the challenges that we are facing as a society. We are trying to balance all of that and make good decisions in the process. As Lisa pointed out, we went through an extensive public process with our energy resource plan conducted by our Utilities Policy Advisory Committee, and they sought input and they looked at different scenarios. And there were options that had us being much more aggressive to going into renewables. And we looked at it and said, okay, we want to be going forward, but we don't want to be on the bleeding edge. And so we are trying to balance that, because we want to make sure, first, so reliability, the first goal. When you turn on the light switch, you will have power that comes on. That's our first goal. We want to make sure we're cost effective in that. And so we've moved into the Southwest Power Pool for precisely that reason. It allows us to have that flexibility. Are there some challenges in this energy transition period? Absolutely. We aren't in the driver's seat of some of those changes, but we want to make sure that we're in control of our own destiny as much as we can. And that's why we've been working with the state to get that quick approval for those gas turbines that give us the flexibility, but also when the wind dies down, as you pointed out, to be able to turn up the gas and generate power that way.
Yeah, and if I might, I think the state's goals and the federal goals, they're just not realistic. I mean, at the same time, they're wanting to convert to renewable energy. They want automobiles to be electric as well, which will triple the grid power distribution requirements, and then try to generate enough power to get there. And the technology isn't there. The battery technology is not there for the kind of storage that would be needed for that.
Okay.
So it gets to this huge amount of a huge baseload issue, and wind and solar are not reliable for baseload. I mean, the batteries will help address that to one degree or another, but it just seems to me like if, you know, the elephant in the room is greenhouse gases, right? This is what's driving all of this. And while we're running pell-mell in this country to go after requirements that we can't obtain, nobody's yelling about China. It drives me nuts. And, you know, there's another source of energy out there, and I'm interested in a comment from you all about it. I don't know if you're seriously considering it or not, but that's nuclear. Now, nuclear does require a lot of water, but I think there's some nuclear technologies coming out that don't use as much water. So that is good, effective baseload that produces no greenhouse gases, gets the one side of this fence what they want, and gets the other side of the other fence what they want on baseload if we can get there.
I'll make a couple comments and turn it over to Lisa to add to that. First, we look at all possibilities in terms of generation. We had a presentation at a utilities board meeting not too long ago about nuclear options that are there. I'm not talking about any of the filibuster. I'm talking about ways to generate electric power. And you're right, there are some small scale nuclear reactors. They're still very much in the experimental stage in terms of the clearances necessary for them. But we are certainly open to looking at that, and we have been looking at various ways to address that going forward. In terms of, you said several things, and sometimes
Yeah, 3 times the power requirements
okay.
because of electric cars.
Yes, that was the other thing I wanted to comment on.
Yeah.
It's not just the increasing use of electric vehicles. It's also pushes from the state and others at higher levels of government to eliminate water heaters that are gas powered, eliminate furnaces in your home that are gas powered, and replace it with what? They're not talking about a coal stove or a wood stove. They're talking about electric. And that will put additional demands on our grid. Part of the way we're trying to address that deals with one of the major projects we have going on, which is to provide customers the opportunity to lessen their cost if they use things at lower demand times of the day. So you talked about there are times when wind may be more abundant than is being used. So one of the purposes of what Colorado Springs Utilities is doing in terms of building fiber to our members of our customers is the ability to offer the option to say, you can get fluctuating power rates. In fact, we can even send you a message, you know, now is a great time to plug in your car, or please program your car to charge between 1 in the morning and 4 in the morning, because we can get you the power a lot cheaper then if you'll agree to do that. And so, yes, we're addressing capacity, but we're also trying to distribute the demand, because part of our challenge is our demand is not constant. People come home, they turn on the air conditioner, they turn on the lights, they turn on their dishwasher after they eat, they turned on the stove, and they're doing a load of laundry and they're drying it all at the same time. And so that our demand is not constant across time. And so part of what we're trying to do is provide our customers an ability to say, you know, I can save some money if I program my car to charge in the middle of the night, as opposed to right when they park it in the garage when they walk home or drive home. And so it's that type of thing that we're also working on the demand side to try to manage and encourage our customers so that we can provide that in a better way. Some of the areas, provide other challenges. We're working with those. As I mentioned, I think we're not driving the policy, we're trying to influence it, but we're also cognizant of we have to operate in the regulatory climate as it is, not as we wish it was. And so as we go forward, we are very much looking at these different processes, but part of the major goal from our standpoint on the fiber side is being able to provide that customer flexibility and incentive to say, help us distribute that electric use. And there's some things you're going to have to do at a certain time. But there are other things that you really can set your dishwasher to run the load in the middle of the night, to set your car charging to occur in the middle of the night. And so by doing that, we're hoping uh, with a fair amount of certainty, actually, it's not just a pie in the sky hope, but we're working with our customer base to try to incentivize using that so we can accommodate that increased electrical demand. Because you're right, certainly as chair of PPACG, when they talk about, oh, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by having, and sometimes I hear a really stupid statement, I'm sorry, about the use of that word here in this distinguished body. When someone says, oh, I'm going to switch to emission-free automobiles, I'm going to have an electric vehicle. Folks, that electric vehicle is powered on something called electricity, and it's generated, at least in part for the foreseeable future, by fossil fuels. We are more efficient in generating in terms of the amount of energy generated than 100,000 separate gas-fired engines.
And oh, by the way, every single part of that electric car was built with oil.
You mean there
I
might be
mean,
plastics in places?
They
I'm
are
sorry.
not emission-free.
Okay. But it is part of what we're working on, and you are right that we have to do this not in maintaining the current usage, but to plan for increased usage. Even if we don't add a single person in El Paso County, we're still going to have to plan for increased usage because people use more than they used to. And, I was reading an interesting book now by a historian talking about this push to get a lamp in every room when they were talking about gas lamps in every room of the house. It's a little different now, but those of you that have moved into an older home and you recognize there's one outlet on this wall and I've got 14 things to plug into it, it is not a secret that we are using more electricity than we used to. Certainly more appliances. We are trying to have more efficient appliances, and that helps with the process as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Lisa.
Thank you.
Just a couple things I want to hit on. The first is the small modular nuclear. We're hearing a lot of conversation in the industry on this, and it's probably one of the probably the most promising zero carbon technologies that are out there. So we are definitely watching that, learning more about that. We do not have any nuclear permitted facilities in Colorado. So we understand that that might be one of our challenges is getting something permitted, but it's definitely something that we are keeping tabs on. As for just some of the conversation about our customers, and Wayne hit a lot about time of use and charging their, could their rates be lower? We're working on different rates for time of use. And customers are starting to put batteries behind the meter now for their vehicles. And so there's opportunities for us to even work with them to now dispatch those batteries onto the grid and what that might look like. And we call those virtual power plants. And so there's so much going on in the industry right now that we want to have solutions for our customers, and also work through how that might even benefit all of our customers. So we're working through that. And then just wanted to hit again that we are working very closely with the state and other utility providers on these same challenges. We're not the only ones dealing with this. And so we are actually in the process of really coming together and having more of a coalition and what that looks like, so we can really get some more buy-in behind this situation with this energy transition. So before I move from this slide, I hit on the energy imbalance market, but I just wanted to mention that our Pike Solar, we're adding another 175 megawatts of solar on the east side of our city, and that shall be in first quarter of 24. I mentioned already that we are adding a battery. It's 100 megawatts of battery. We actually have an RFP out right now, and we're asking for vendors to tell us what kind of technologies they have. There's so much change in the market, so we'd like to learn more about what kind of technologies are out there, what would be the capacity. So we might be looking at 250 megawatt a bank of batteries. It could be maybe a different increment from that, but we're going to be closing that RFP in December, and we'll have a lot more information about what that looks like. Just really wanted to hit on a little bit about our fiber network that we started construction on in September. And this is a network that will benefit our operations. And Wayne hit on this a little bit, but this really is going to allow us to collect data on our system so we can more efficiently operate it. This will allow us, for example, to understand where we have water leaks quicker and actually be able to respond to that. It will also give us information on our transmission line, as an example, based on temperature. And this does help us with any type of wildland fire mitigation. And so there's definitely some benefits that we have with adding this fiber network. We started that in September. We're hoping to have construction completed in the end of 2028. The project cost will be offset through a lease agreement with Ting Internet. So as we install this fiber, Ting will sign on customers, and then we will get some revenue off that, and we are anticipating that covering the capital cost of that project. So a really exciting project for us.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
What's the expectation on consumers providing power?
Consumers providing power, let's see, which
Every consumer
Yeah,
every
so-
consumer of power is a potential producer of power. I know very few outside of some
They're talking
solar
about like
panels.
solar panels on
Very,
roofs.
very
this-
few.
This goes back to the batteries behind the meter, and so they become the virtual power plant where we can actually take that power and potentially discharge that back onto the grid. And so these are some of the opportunities that we're seeing moving forward.
Where are they getting how are they storing batteries?
So some,
What are they using to power that battery?
they might have solar on their house and they're charging their battery, and then they're charging, their vehicles, but then they might have excess, which then could be discharged back.
How many percentage-wise of the city have solar panels?
I'm sorry, I don't have that answer.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how many producers are there if we're investing this into every home for something that could be 0.5%.
So this is just really showing the opportunity that we see moving forward. This could be a potential opportunity, and we're seeing this in other communities that they're already doing some of this in California. So again, this is something that we're looking at, and this fiber allows us to really collect some of that data and benefit from
Okay,
that.
well, my
go ahead,
concern there would be California's mandating every new home puts solar on their house. I hope that's not something that
We're not mandating
we are trying
that.
to do something like that in the future or near future.
No, these are just opportunities that we're identifying.
There's a lot of potential in that in commercial roofing as well. You got the flat roofs on a lot of big box buildings, and there's a lot of real estate on top. So those buildings don't necessarily have to be residential. Actually, the real issue, though, is the cost of all those solar panels. It's really, really expensive. And they have efficiency problems as well, although over time, the technology, they've been getting better, but they get a ton of efficiency problems, too.
So what's next? We update our clean energy plan annually, just like we do our water plan. We are installing smart meters in our homes right now. That's a project that should be complete in 2024. We continue to optimize our rate structure to really drive the behaviors that we're needing of our customers to optimize how we provide services. And then we're adding, like I mentioned, more solar, batteries, and we're continuing to follow our clean energy plan we've got plans right now to retire Drake by the end of of 2029 to meet the 80% carbon reduction. And then one thing I haven't talked a lot about is really about planning for electrification and electric vehicles. And I'm going to talk specifically about the electrification. We have a clean heat plan that we are actually putting together right now that is, as a natural gas provider, we have to reduce our levels by 4% by 2025, and then 22% by 2030, compared to 2015 levels. And so we are putting together our plan right now. We have an option to pay a cost cap, which will then go back to our customers, but that is an option if we cannot meet those reductions. And so really this is about moving towards electrification and what that could look like. And so my team right now is putting together standards on what that could mean for new development, and something that we just met with the regional building department and the HBA, talked to them about how we need their help to meet these standards. And that was actually just voted down by the Bureau of Review. But again, it'll become a mandatory requirement in 2026. So it gives them a little bit more time to prepare for that.
Thank you. And before you continue, just to ask a question of my fellow commissioners. We're at our 2 hours. I'm happy to continue, but I don't know if others may have a need to be moving on to something else, or do we want to reconvene at a different time? But are you good? Everybody good for a little bit longer? Okay. And I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Williams, so let's continue.
Okay, so this is my last slide.
Oh,
so
good.
This really is a timeline of everything that Colorado Springs is working on the energy side. And as you can see, there's a lot of moving parts here and a lot of activities. And so, this year we joined the SPP, Western Imbalance Market. We closed Drake. We are next year going to have our natural gas generators, our modular units online. Next year, we also have to file our clean heat plan, which is what I just referred to. We are also in 24 going to have a new solar, a battery online. And then in 25, we have to meet that 4% natural gas reduction or pay the cost cap. And then in 2030, Nixon will be closed. And we also will have another requirement of meeting the 22% for the clean heat plan. And then again, with Nixon closing, we'll have met the 80%. So lot of moving parts on the energy side, in addition to what we're working on the water side.
Thank you. One quick question on the 2030 Nixon closed. Does that mean the coal is closed, but Nixon keeps operating?
So this is, so we would be closing the coal plant. Now we will have to determine how we will replace that generation. And so this is where we're looking at the addition of batteries. And again, that's based on what kind of technologies are available. We're also, there's just really following the market and what available technologies there are available at that point. So we're working through that right now. What does that look like to replace that generation when Nixon closes?
And notwithstanding your maybe buying power from the grid or doing a few other things here with renewables, but with electric vehicles increasing in use, it doesn't seem like just adding batteries to Nixon is even remotely close to what the needs are going to be.
Yes, and so again, this is where we're looking at the different technologies. Again,
And, for whatever it's worth, that's only 8 years away.
It is, and so we understand that, and that's why we're having these conversations about what that looks like. And other utilities are dealing with the same situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we referred to Nixon closing, that's the coal plant. There is a Front Range gas plant that is actually, I think, our largest provider of electricity. That's continuing on. They happen to be located at the same exit, and I think the sign says Nixon. But Nixon we refer to as the coal plant, and the gas plant is Front Range, and that will continue to operate for quite
I
some time.
appreciate understanding that nuance. I had just placed all of them into the term Nixon.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's what the exit says, so
Yeah.
you look at it that way. But that's why I just wanted to clarify. Commissioners, we very much appreciate your willingness to have all 5 of you here and to participate. I could tell by the questions that this is an area of interest. If there are things that we can provide in the future, please don't hesitate to let us know. Um, we are a significant partner, and although we happen to share the name Colorado Springs and happen to share the same city council and board of utilities, there are differences between the two, and some of those significant differences are the amount of service we provide outside the city limits. Whereas City of Colorado Springs is focused really on city limits, Colorado Springs Utilities includes a wide range, and either through gas, electric, or water, most of the community, including those in the unincorporated, are actually colleagues, and then we work in partnership arrangements with the others. So we're pleased to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Happy to answer any ending questions, but I know our 2 hours is up, and so thanks for letting us do that last slide as opposed to come back and do that separately.
Thank you. And I know there may be some questions from the commissioners, but I'll just express our appreciation for your coming. Really, really informative. In particular, some of the challenges that you're facing that we don't normally get much of an opportunity to discuss here. We have kind of the generalized idea and some of the legislation coming from Denver that we know have been forcing behavior changes across the state. But it's interesting to see the details about how you're trying your best to respond to that. I don't know how the rest of my commissioners feel, but I bet they would all be interested in making this some kind of regular, periodic kind of discussion. So I don't know what that would mean as far as timing. We can have that conversation later. But if you guys are good with it, let's plan on doing this on some kind of regular, periodic basis. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yeah, I just wanted, on the build out on reducing greenhouse or whatever whatever you call it. What's the plan generally in terms of moving to renewables or the grid energy? Does it look like purchasing more from the grid energy that you have, the Western whatever, or building more solar and wind? And is that planned in Colorado Springs, in the county, or elsewhere?
So some of that is renewables, but also batteries. We have 400 megawatts of batteries in our resource plan. And so again, we're updating that annually. So that can always change as new technologies come available. Again, we're always looking at what's available out on the market to purchase. So several of our renewable resources, we have contracts, so we do not own those facilities, but we have a take and pay contract. So again, we're always evaluating what's out there and available.
And my question specifically was more like, if you're doing renewables locally, will that be in the city, or will there be requests for stuff in the county, like Pike Solar was in the county?
It really depends on who we're working with and where that land is. Typically, we're seeing some of that. And really around the wind is really where we'd like to diversify. We've got a good amount of solar now in our system, and would like to add wind. And sometimes that's outside of our area, and we'll use the transmission system to bring that in. So it could be outside in the county, definitely.
So, and just to clarify, some of it may be in unincorporated El Paso County, and some of it may be in other places, because again, that distribution, making sure that if it's not blowing here, perhaps it's blowing somewhere else, is an important part of it. What we will do is we'll send over to you links to, we referred to the gas, the electric plan, the water plan. We'll send you links to those so that you have them and can get into more detail. But those outline the specific portfolio mix, Commissioner, that we anticipate with respect to electric generation in the future. And so we'll send those over to you so you can have the chance to review them. They're on the website, but we'll send it over so it's easy for y'all to take a look at. So thank you again for your time. And I know when Stan and I started talking about this, I sprung this on the staff and said, guess what? You guys get to do this. And I very much appreciate their work on pulling all this together. And Lisa and Andy and their 2 teams have been working very hard. So thanks to them, and thanks to y'all and your staff for your assistance in pulling all this together. Have a wonderful day.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll bring this up to the dais and just see if there's any remaining comments from any of the commissioners. And Commissioner Williams, do you have, okay, I think I saw your head shaking no?
No, thank you. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you. Any other comments from any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Gonzalez?
No, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. Appreciate it. I think sometimes the collaboration and communications, we could always been a little bit better. That's why I think this was so important, so we get the information. And, one of the reasons I did ask was, I'll be very honest, a couple of county commissioners did provide that very robust public comment process and provided comments and input, which was not really taken, which is great. We're individual citizens, residents. Our input is no more important than any other resident. But then there's requests to do things in the county, like the Pike Solar, which we did because we support. We're trying to do, we always voting to do the right thing. But it seemed like some of the communication was not coming. And so the last year, I was requesting that we got a little bit more information on some of these things moving forward. And so that's why I asked them what the plan is, because if things are going to be done in the county, I asked that we be partners. Let's work on things together. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your comments. All right, seeing no further business with this work session, and again, thank you for the presentation from CSU. This work session is adjourned.